Okay, so we are heading towards the end of chapter 1. We are at section 3, which is the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, lesson 1, and today we'll talk about the internal weaknesses of this mighty empire in pages 32 to 33 of your book. Go ahead, go to our Loda.usd website and Clever, and then from there, Cengage Learning, and then log in your student account for our World History book. You can launch English or Spanish edition, and it's in Unit 1, Chapter 1, Section 3. Section 3 is about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and in Lesson 1, we'll talk about the internal weaknesses of the empire. Again, let me review you with the essential question of Chapter 1. What was the power and enduring legacy of the Roman Empire? And our objective for this lesson is to analyze the issues that led to a crisis for the Roman Empire in the 3rd century. Historians have debated for centuries the question of why Rome fell. The modern consensus is that there were multiple factors of varying severity and duration that converged to make the empire as it had been untenable. Military, political, economic, and social factors all contributed to what is considered the end of the Roman Empire. The truth is that these problems began long before the empire fell. The 3rd century crisis is often identified as the point at which the empire began to unravel. So despite the occasional unbalanced leader, the Roman Empire ran smoothly for 200 years. Then things began to fall apart. Disputes over who should be emperor caused the return of political violence and civil war, citizens fighting against each other. In some years, 4 or even 6 emperors were on the throne. By around 235 AD, the Roman world had plunged into a crisis. So the bottom line or main idea of this lesson is that military problems led to a crisis in the Roman Empire. In other words, what made them great is the same reason that caused them to fall apart. So let's summarize this. The Roman Empire is a conquering empire. Because of its military prowess, they keep on expanding and conquering new lands, and because of this, they expanded so far and wide. In other words, they expanded so thin. So even though they are the best fighting force in the ancient world, this vast expanse or huge geographic and cultural differences was difficult to govern. So defending such a large area also proved to be difficult. They faced attacks in 2 fronts at the same time, which drained money and resources all across the empire. To put it simply, war is very expensive. So because of this, they have to tax their people a lot. So regardless of the economic status, whether you are rich or poor, when the government collects too much taxes from you, eventually you will get tired of this, and because of this, there was social unrest, and so from social unrest, it led to civil war, which of course put Rome again in a very difficult situation. While they are fighting foreign invaders and conquering new lands, their own citizens are fighting against each other. Their own citizens are rebelling against the government. So these military problems provoked further political and social problems. The same military power that made Rome an empire is the one that is causing them lots of problems and issues that eventually led to its fall. Now, what are the other problems that are causing these internal weaknesses in the Roman Empire? So these are political, economic, and social problems. So politically, emperors were blamed for not protecting the empire, and they were regularly replaced or even murdered by their own guards. Territories like France, Spain, and Great Britain, well, just Britain at that time, preferred to trust their local rulers instead of their emperor. Obviously, this constant warfare also ruined the economy. So wars were expensive and emperors expected the people to pay for them. So when you tax too much, ordinary people grew angry, criminal organizations grew, and outbursts of mob anger increased. It even became difficult to recruit local officials because it is a risk to take these positions in the local government. In these unstable times, good citizenship took second place to looking after oneself. In other words, citizens that were patriotic, citizens who loved Rome, became selfish, individualistic, to each their own, as they say. So here's the summary of their military problems. Rome was fighting the Parthian Empire in the east, and at the same time, they are fighting the Germanic tribes in the west. While there is social, even civil wars at home, so they are fighting on all sides, and they are fighting different groups of people, and it was a very difficult situation for Rome at this point. Now, politically, obviously, it's difficult to govern a huge empire. Frequently changing emperors added to the problem, and power gained by local leaders eventually led to not only uprising but a total revolution. So far they have military problems, they have political problems, and of course, what's next, the most obvious, is the economic reason. It's all about the money, it's all about the resources. Because of these military and political problems, trade was interrupted. People were heavily taxed, meaning the government collected so much unreasonable money and resources from them. It lowered the value of their currency. The big word for this is inflation. Inflation is when money loses its value. Say, for example, if you can buy a pair of shoes for $50, when there is an inflation, it will cost you maybe $20,000 in order to buy the same pair of shoe that you were able to buy $20 before the inflation. Well, of course, inflation is a lot complicated than that, but if you will simplify it, it means that the buying power of the money, when it loses its value, it's called inflation. Now we have the military, political, and economic reasons. Now let's go to the social reasons. Because of all these problems, unrest, or there's a gap between the rich and the poor. Of course, the rich are taking advantage of the situation of many poor people by exploiting them to the point of slavery. And at the same time, there were criminal organizations, and also the civic responsibility felt no longer that important. So in other words, Roman citizens became less patriotic. And because of this, the strength of the mighty Roman Empire began to crumble. And those are the reasons why there was internal weaknesses from within the empire that eventually led to its demise. So those are the four reasons that caused the internal weaknesses of the Roman Empire. Now let's go to the review and assess questions. The first one, reading check. Why did the size of the Roman Empire cause military problems? You can find the answers in the first 3 paragraphs. Number 2, analyze the cause and effect. What was the result of the emperor's expensive wars? So when you say expensive, it means what? So I'm already giving you the clue. Now let's go to number 3. Draw conclusions. How did Rome's military problems lead to political, social, and economic problems? So there you have it, Chapter 1, Section 3.1, Internal Weaknesses, pages 32 to 33 of your textbook or your online book. Don't forget to answer this review and assess questions to the review and assess file, which is in Google Slide. It's attached with this lesson that you are watching right now. Now go back to Google Classroom and find this Google slide and write your responses to this review and assess questions on the right side of this slide.